Canada's retirement income so that Canadians can retire with dignity. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? It is agreed. Would all those in favor of the motion please say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. Barring no other notices of motion, we'll move on to oral questions put by members to ministers. The time is now 10:10. We will finish at 11:40. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I would like to return to where we started in this House session just a few short weeks ago, when we were here for the first time since the election and were determined, and I believe sincerely so from all sides, to find areas of common ground where we can work together. And so I do have a question for the acting Premier, and it is in that spirit. Mr. Speaker, we read in allnovascotia.com today that there may well be a report coming forward from the acting Premier, who is our Finance Minister, of a looming budget deficit, and it may be reported as a sizable one, Mr. Speaker. And so I want to point out today that one of the areas where there is a great similarity between the official opposition and our position and the position of the Liberal government is in the need to find savings in the number of district health authorities across our province, the great health super bureaucracy that exists, to ensure that that money is available for actual health care. It's a common commitment of the Liberal Party in their election platform and of the PC Party in ours, Mr. Speaker. So we are here and ready to work with the government on the savings that can be found from a proper and overdue rationalization of the health bureaucracy. And so my question to the acting Premier, who is also Finance Minister, can she provide us with an update on when the government will be moving to change the health superstructure and the number of district health authorities?
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the question from the Leader of the Opposition. And I don't have the exact timing of that process that's underway with the DHAs, and I think it would be more appropriate to let the Minister of Health speak to that. But I would like to certainly suggest that we are looking for savings as we go forward, and as Finance Minister in that capacity, I'm looking for savings in all departments. We've asked for a 1% reduction.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and to the Leader of the Opposition. I can perhaps give a short version, or I can give a very long version, but he's got two more questions. So I just want to say, first and foremost, where this is a significant change as to how we will deliver health care in the future, it's one that needs strong consultation with medical stakeholders, with the public, with unions, and that will be kicked off, and a schedule coming out early in the new year, when we will visit all of the existing 9 DHAs, and the overarching plan is in place, but we now need to put the details for Nova Scotians early in the new year.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate that answer. Mr. Speaker, I said a moment ago that it's important that we return to the place where we started in this session, and that is to find areas of common ground where we can work together. And I do know that we veered, all of us, from all sides, from that intent from time to time, even just in the last 2 weeks. But I do want to return to that important place where we work together on areas where we agree, Mr. Speaker, and this is one. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I just want to offer to the Acting Premier, the Minister of Health, that we put together our own plan on this. It's not exactly the same as the government's, but it's close. And I hope that we can work together, maybe even meet as leaders and health critics and ministers on how best to go about finding those savings that all Nova Scotians know are out there in our health super bureaucracy. Mr. Speaker, having said that, it is actually the healthcare workers themselves and the service they provide that I have in mind today. Because as long as they wait with uncertainty about their jobs, about the service that they provide, about what the future will look like for them and their employer. And so I would like to ask the Acting Premier if she can commit to moving quickly on this important issue so that healthcare workers can get on with whatever the new situation looks like for them.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to convey to Leader of the Opposition that this will occur within the first year, the first full year of our mandate, and in early January a plan will come out, and one of the things in the plan, the early days of the plan, will be to convey to all healthcare workers that this will be delivered in a very strategic, a very thoughtful manner with little or no impact on the jobs of those who deliver the high-quality healthcare to the province of Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I want to thank the Acting Premier and the Minister of Health for their words on this area of common ground that we can work on together. And Mr. Speaker, I know that when we in opposition put health care authority reduction in our platform, that we did our homework on how best to achieve it without unduly impacting healthcare workers themselves. And I just want to offer to share our work with the government as they put together their plan. Again, it's not exactly the same, but it's close enough that we can get to a better place by working together on this important issue, Mr. Speaker. And I will just again say that we are more than happy to do that when we find areas of common ground like we do here. Mr. Speaker, recent reports like those in allnovascotia.com that indicate that the province may well not have a surplus, as was previously reported, but in fact have a deficit, means that there will be more debt, Mr. Speaker, and less money for healthcare actual service as opposed to administration in the future. We all want to avoid that if possible. So when healthcare savings can be found in administration, I believe that it's important that we act to find those savings, and it is an area, I know, of agreement between the government and the official opposition. I do want to ask the Acting Premier, who is our Finance Minister, if she will agree to provide a timeline on health authority reduction along with her upcoming fiscal update.
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the question I thought was going to the Health Minister on the timeline for his changes to the DHAs, but I can say that we will not have that ready to provide for you when the update is done. I'm legislated to provide an update before the end of this year, calendar year. So that is underway. A lot of planning is already underway for that. And on the day that I give the fiscal update, that's what we'll be focusing on singularly. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Acting Premier. Mr. Speaker, I, like most Nova Scotians, was disappointed to read the details of past land dealings by the member for Guysborough Eastern Shore Tracadie in today's Chronicle Herald. This October, when similar details were disclosed by the same publication, the Premier defended the member from Guysborough Eastern Shore Tracadie, alleging the story contained, and I quote, misrepresented, distorted facts that aren't checked, that are inaccurate being put on, being out into the media as if they're accurate. And Mr. Speaker, I'll table that article. So my question to the acting Premier, does she believe the facts presented in today's Herald are accurate? And if not, what specific details would she take issue with?
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
I'll wait.
Okay, the question doesn't apply to any specific ministry. Can we stop the clock and just have a brief recess? I would suggest to the honourable member that whether the minister in question is asking her opinion on an article in the newspaper is not a proper question. Did you have something else?
Mr. Speaker, in October, when details were revealed regarding the past transactions made by the member for Guysborough Eastern Shore, Tracadie, when he was president of the Guysborough Tourism Complex Limited, the Premier was quoted as saying, "He's been forthright and honest and upfront in all my dealings with him." So my question for the acting Premier is, if she can confirm that the Premier and the government caucus had conducted a full review into the past business dealings by the member, and if we can expect that the results of that review will be provided to the public.
Thank you for rephrasing the question. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker. Sure. Mr. Speaker, I find it most unfortunate that this matter is being brought to the floor of the legislature. There's been 2 articles on this. I believe the member from Guysborough Eastern Shore Tracadie has been honest and upfront with this, and we're still at a loss as to exactly what allegation is being alleged in the article, as there is none. This matter has clearly been dealt with, and I am sure the Premier stands behind his initial comments on this matter.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party on her first supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Premier has stated repeatedly that trust is the yardstick by which Nova Scotians should measure this government. So, Mr. Speaker, in the interest of trust, will the acting Premier request that the member from Guysborough Eastern Shore Tracadie make available all financial and legal documents related to the swap of land between the Guysborough Tourism Complex and the wife of the member from Guysborough Eastern Shore Tracadie in 1995?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, when it comes to a question of trust, there is no better judge of trust than the residents of Nova Scotia. And when it comes to the member in question that the NDP have decided today to attack, I would suggest that the people have passed judgment in electing him for 25 years and as a municipal councillor. He has served the people of his municipality with distinction, not only as a councillor, but also as a warden, and they have rewarded that most recently by electing him to this chamber. To have the leader of the NDP now not only question him, but question his wife is absolutely deplorable.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to return to health care, if I may, an issue of great interest to all Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, in allnovascotia.com this morning, it was reported that the government may well find that it's back into a deficit position, that the debts of the province continue to run up. That makes it very important that we work together to find waste and inefficiency in our system, like the number of health authorities, and ensure that that money is saved and directed to actual health care. I do have a question for our acting Premier, who is also the Minister of Finance. Last year it was discovered that Capital Health had been denied permission by the former NDP government to end its subsidy to a Tim Hortons franchise and other private fast food providers at its premises in the Capital District Health Authority. Mr. Speaker, this is an area where I believe there is also common ground between the new Liberal government and the official opposition, who both called the government of the day on why they would take healthcare dollars and spend it on fast food franchises. In fact, the leader of the Liberal Party now, our Premier, said at the time that it was, quote, corporate welfare of the worst kind, and I could not agree more. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the acting Premier, and now that they're in government, is that still the policy of the Liberal Party?
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and we appreciate that question. And as the Leader of the Opposition has said, this was something that we felt was wrong when we looked at it as we were in opposition. And I can assure the member that this is something that is being looked at the Health Department.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate that answer from the acting Premier. This is an area where we can work together. Mr. Speaker, Capital Health has reported that they expect to lose approximately $1,400,000 on subsidies to private fast food providers like Tim Hortons on their premises each year, and tried 3 times under the previous NDP government to get permission to stop handing that money off to private companies like Tim Hortons so that they could then spend it on actual health care delivery. I'm very pleased to hear that, just like us in the official opposition, the government sees the error in allowing our tax dollars to be used in such a wasteful way. Mr. Speaker, I will ask the acting Premier, will she take action to ensure that no health authority in Nova Scotia is allowed to prop up a private fast food franchise with our tax dollars?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the opposition leader for the question. And it's one of those areas that when you come into government and it's part of the business plan for this year. It's so far underway. It's one that we are currently working with Capital Health to see whether or not the contract is there for a period of time, and how we can now deal with this. And so, in fact, it's a question very much that has come back to be a current one. Not just from the opposition bringing it forward, but one as we look at business plans and where future changes can be made that will, in fact, put that kind of money on the front line.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate that answer. Again, this is an area where Nova Scotians have sent us here in government, in opposition, to find areas of common ground that we can work on to make life better for them. Stopping the use of our tax dollars to subsidize a private Tim Hortons or other fast food outlet in our hospitals is a great way to actually ensure that our tax dollars get to real healthcare delivery, and send a message about the importance of health promotion in our hospitals themselves, where the government's not actually encouraging the sale of donuts and French fries and so on in their own cafeterias. So I would like to ask the acting Premier if she can provide us the assurance that it will be the policy of the new government going forward that none of the health budget will be used for subsidy of private fast food outlets in our hospitals.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And first of all, I want to convey to the opposition leader that I certainly would welcome an opportunity to meet with him and look at some of the plans that they were developing that would deliver stronger health care for all of Nova Scotians, and this is one of those areas that can be top of mind when we do meet.
The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My question, too, is to the Minister of Health. Paramedics extracted significant concessions from the previous government through collective bargaining. They left the remaining issues to arbitration. Paramedics were always concerned that any gains made would be clawed back by the company through increasing the costs of their benefits. So my question to the Minister is, what assurances can the Minister give paramedics that they won't be forced to give back any hard-won gains to the company who they work for and from which they must purchase health benefits directly?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to let the member opposite, the opposition leader in the House, or the opposition, House Leader. That's right. I want to speak about our paramedics, who we all know deliver one of the strongest services of critical care in the province. And we want to be a government that does everything to keep advanced care paramedics here and work to make sure that their livelihood is protected, they get the training that they need. And in this particular area, I would have to say at this stage, I have not looked at the details of the last contract and how it is going to impact on the compensation for paramedics, but it is one that I can assure the member opposite that I am prepared to take that detailed look at and to hear from paramedics directly on how it may affect them.
The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I do thank the Minister for that answer, because it does just roll into my next question, but I'm going to provide him with a little more detail and help him out a little bit here. There's some evidence already that paramedics will be forced to pay back some of that hard-won money through collective bargaining and arbitration through increased benefit premiums. In fact, in a memo dated December 4th, informed members of the IUOE Local 272 that, quote, in the spring, IUOE Local 272 was notified of the decision to hold and defer any premium changes for the short-term disability and long-term disability plans while working through the collective bargaining negotiation process. This is, Mr. Speaker, an admission that the company was waiting to see what the new contract would cost before setting benefit premiums. The memo also lets union members know that their premiums will be going up $12 each pay. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister, the Department of Health is the sole customer of EMC Nova Scotia. Will the Minister meet with the company officials and make sure that union members are treated fairly?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and that's a very, very important question that in regard to paramedics and making their livelihood in the province while delivering first-class, really a top-class service of anywhere in North America. I will meet with the new head of EMC to discuss this issue, but I can guarantee this House, Mr. Speaker, I won't be a minister that interferes with negotiations.
Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And no, I hope not, because we saw what it cost us on the last round. So my final question, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, requiring employees to purchase health benefits from the company that they work for puts a company in an unfair advantage. As you know, there's a lot of give and take here, as it's a conflict of interest that EMC is actually owned by Blue Cross, who gives them their insurance as well. So my final question, will the Minister look into allowing paramedics to purchase health benefits from whichever company that they choose?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to that question, I can assure the member opposite that this will be part of reviewing with the head of EMC because they are providing a service to the government of Nova Scotia and to all Nova Scotians, and having a good deal for paramedics is a good deal for Nova Scotians.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, financial analysts have been warning for some time that Canadians are not saving enough for retirement. A growing number of hard-working Nova Scotians are facing retirement without adequate pension income through workplace plans, personal savings, and have only the Canada Pension Plan to rely on. Mr. Speaker, when the provincial finance ministers met last year, there was a growing consensus that the Canada Pension Plan is the best vehicle for addressing what will be a serious income and consumption crisis very soon. So, Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister of Finance is this: where does your government stand on enhancing the Canada Pension Plan?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the question from the Minister, not from the Minister, from the member opposite, who was the former Minister of Finance, who would know some of the discussions that are being held with other Ministers of Finance across the province. Absolutely, it is on the agenda for finance ministers to look at retirement security for Canadians, and there's evidence that the CPP plan is a strong and plan that has weathered the decades since it was brought in. At present, we're still in discussions and negotiations and following the debate federally. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party on her first supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, I didn't hear a rousing support for the Canada Pension Plan from our government. Mr. Speaker, nearly a third of our workforce will face a steep drop in their standard of living by the time they retire. Most provinces, pension experts, labour unions, and seniors organizations agree that enhancing the Canada Pension Plan is the best way to avoid a crisis of income security in the very near future. So my question through you, Mr. Speaker, to the Finance Minister is, would she please explain why her government is so indifferent to a problem which surely will not go away anytime soon without acting to improve CPP?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the question of enhancing retirement income is not one that can be answered in just a few short sentences here in question period. But I would like to say that our government takes it very seriously that people are retiring without adequate replacement income from private pension plans or from their own savings or from the Canada Pension Plan. But the minister is wrong in saying that this would be, I wrote down, she said in the very near future that this would help. An enhancement to the CPP will be a long-term position. It's not going to help in the near future. It won't help people that are already retired or about to retire. It will help young workers who are putting their money in for 30 or 40 years and then will retire. So the urgency of changing the CPP is not immediate. The discussions are underway. The federal minister and the provincial ministers are looking at it, and it is something that needs to be in the mix with public plans, voluntary plans, and so on.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party on her final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, Federal Finance Minister Jim Flaherty has been dragging his feet on any action that would lead to improving the Canada Pension Plan. First, he said he wanted all the provinces in agreement, and then he said the economic recovery following the recession had to be stronger. So, Mr. Speaker, my question for the Minister of Finance is, why is she and her government adopting the position of the Harper government on enhancing the Canada Pension Plan?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And again, I think the member opposite is wrong in suggesting that she understands what the position is of the government. We have a position of being responsible and caring for pensioners and doing our very best to look after the people of Nova Scotia as they approach retirement or are in retirement. Mr. Speaker, I spoke strongly against a move by the NDP government which took away the indexing of pensioners that were under the public service plan, and that, I think, shows where our intentions were strong. Thank you.
The honourable member for Kings North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister responsible for Part 2 of the Gaming Control Act, VLTs. Mr. Speaker, as the Minister knows, a gaming centre is scheduled to open in a residential area of Hammonds Plains, and we have residents from that area in the gallery today. The residents are understandably concerned about the increased traffic and the effect the VLT centre will have on their neighbourhood. What assurance can the Minister give residents such as Bruce Innes and Orange Sangster that the VLT centre will not change their neighbourhood?
The Honourable Minister responsible for the Gaming Control Act.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and just for the information of that member, VLTs are under Part 1 of the Gaming Control Act. Mr. Speaker, the member asked this the other day in the House, and as he's aware, the Government of Nova Scotia entered into an agreement in 2011 with all First Nations, which is a binding and legal agreement which controls gaming in the province and on First Nations bands. As the member would also be aware, the province does not approve of those. There is no approval process that is given by the province, and the same problem has actually happened with the municipality, where because it's reserve land that was actually permitted by the federal Conservatives to be in that community recently, that it also doesn't have to abide by zoning of the municipality. So, Mr. Speaker, the location of that facility is ultimately a decision of the federal government when they made a decision to award reserve lands in that community.
The honourable member for Kings North on his first supplementary.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Minister, and appreciate the correction on Part 1 and Part 2. The residents of Hammonds Plains feel helpless and don't know where to turn. The responsible gaming strategy of 2011 indicated that the provincial government would work proactively with both First Nations and with residents. Will the minister commit to meet with the concerned citizens of Hammonds Plains and discuss this?
The honourable minister responsible for the Gaming Authority.
Yes.
The honourable member for Kings North on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Minister, for that commitment, and that is all.
The honourable leader of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, again, my question through you is to the Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, today the Canada Pension Plan only applies to annual earnings below $50,000, and it replaces just a quarter of a person's income in retirement to a maximum of around $12,150 annually. PEI's Liberal Minister of Finance understands that this is nowhere near enough income for middle-income earners to plan retirement around, and he has come up with a plan. The PEI plan would gradually increase coverage up to approximately $100,000 annually and replace 40% of income. So, Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister of Finance, would she indicate if she's prepared to support, even in principle, PEI's approach?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And, again, I understand the importance of this question, but I think that it's important for the House to know that this is an issue with a lot of different impacts. Certainly, we want to talk with business who have to pay their share of this employee benefit if it were to be increased. We have a lot of consultation to do, a lot of study to do, and I'm not today prepared to give a position to the member opposite on this. What I will say is that we're very well aware of the pension needs of Nova Scotians and the elements that have to be improved to get them to a proper retirement.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party on her first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Bill Van Goyer, the chair of the Canadian Association of Retired Persons, or CARP, wrote a letter to Jim Flaherty, the Premier, and the Minister of Finance on November the 13th. And, Mr. Speaker, I will table a copy of that letter. Mr. Van Goyer wrote, and I quote, "The choice is now up to you to decide and declare if and when there will be a change to improve the CPP." So, Mr. Speaker, my question for the Minister is, what is your response to the Canadian Association of Retired Persons?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to note that I've had discussions with the Minister of Finance from Prince Edward Island, and I've certainly reviewed his plan as well that's put forward, but it's important to know that these discussions have been underway on the federal and provincial level since 2009, that the plan and the proposals have changed, that there are objections by certain provinces that are being, I would say that the Minister of Finance from PEI is trying to address and make changes. So it's a very fluid discussion, a lot of negotiating and changing going on, and it doesn't require Nova Scotia to have a position today.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party on her final supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table a paper called Strengthening the Canada Pension Plan, Take It to the Public, in which the Caledon Institute correctly points out that the deliberations on reforming the CPP are happening behind closed government doors. So my final question to the Minister is this. Given that the matter of income security is of such importance for a growing number of Nova Scotians, shouldn't there be formal consultations with the public on enhancing the Canada Pension Plan?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And again, I would simply say that this is an issue that's been ongoing for years, that we will be part of that discussion, that I have spoken to a number of the finance ministers from across the country, most notably PEI in Ontario, who are in favour of changes. But we also have a meeting set up with the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. We need to hear from their view as well, as I'm sure everyone in the House can appreciate. And, Mr. Speaker, during their time as government, when the NDP had control of government, they did not confer with the retirees of Nova Scotia before taking away their indexing.
The Honourable Member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is to the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, the Stadacona Hospital is scheduled to close in March of 2014. The military have offered to allow the government to use the operating rooms in this facility. The wait list for surgical procedures in this province is growing daily, as we know, and some would consider this out of hand. This puts undue stress and hardship on families as they care for a loved one who may be suffering while waiting. My question, has the Minister been in contact with the Department of National Defence about the use of the Stadacona operating rooms?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the health critic opposite for the question. And at this stage, no negotiations or meetings have taken place, to my knowledge, in this regard.
The Honourable Member for Hants West on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Minister knows, spending in health care is growing, and it will continue to do so as our population ages. In the past, the Auditor General has pointed out situations where the Department has failed to recognize cost savings and ignored opportunities that could save millions of dollars for our healthcare system. This overhead at the facility at Stadacona is already long paid for, and there are military doctors there willing to work. Does the Minister agree that this is worthy of consideration for the hundreds of Nova Scotians waiting for surgery?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As we take a look at reducing surgical wait times, in particular with orthopedics, cataract surgery, general surgery, all of the capacity in the province is being looked at. One of the reasons why we are changing the DHA structure is to allow for greater collaboration for clinicians to practice in multiple facilities, and this is a worthy idea that the member has brought forward.
The honourable member for Hants West on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the answer from the minister. And I'll go right to my question. Given that there is an opportunity, will the minister commit to working with the representatives of the Stadacona Hospital to open their operating rooms for Nova Scotians before that potential closure in March of 2014?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And what I can commit to is gaining an understanding of what kind of a relationship and process needed for Nova Scotians to deliver, Nova Scotian physicians to deliver services within the context of a military base and military operation, and that I'm sure is provincial, federal requirements there, and we can certainly have a look at that.
The honourable member for Queens Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal. Mr. Speaker, winter is a treacherous time for drivers and people walking. Dark, snowy, foggy, and wet weather makes it difficult to see properly. Since the beginning of November, there has already been a half a dozen different incidents involving people being struck in crosswalks. My question, Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister is what action is this government taking to increase awareness about crosswalk safety in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I do truly thank the member for his question. Every member of this House and many Nova Scotians are aware of what's happening with pedestrian traffic in particular, and some of the things that are happening around sidewalk safety. In particular, the HRM has a traffic study committee that they're commissioning a report looking at all sort of some of the factors involved in some of these the collisions and the issues we're having with sidewalks. They're going to release that report in February. At that time, we're going to engage with our municipal partners to see what the details are. We're very interested in learning. We want to keep Nova Scotians safe too, Mr. Speaker, so it's important for us to see what those recommendations are. At that time, we'll take a look. There's been a number of instances where we've partnered with municipalities in the past to increase and enhance pedestrian safety. Obviously, we want to keep people safe. We're going to endeavour to do that. In any way we can be partners with the municipal units, we will do so in the interest of safety for Nova Scotians. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Queens Shelburne on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Minister for your response. Mr. Speaker, improved crosswalk safety means listening to all stakeholders involved to ensure a comprehensive strategy is in place. My question to the Minister, what conversations has the Minister had with community stakeholders about the issues of crosswalk safety since the first instance last week, and what recommendations, if any, did they make to the Minister?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks for the question. I've met with the Road Safety Committee yesterday morning. Again, as a Nova Scotian, as an MLA, and as someone who's concerned about the safety of our citizens, I want to understand sort of where we help and what role we play. So, again, we've got department officials who are in constant contact with the municipal units, with private stakeholders, and there's some in particular in the HRM who have some very good ideas and has done some significant research on what ways we can improve safety for pedestrians and, of course, for drivers, as this is a shared responsibility in the sidewalks and on the roadways. So we are listening to any stakeholder, and for me as the Minister, if there's someone that has suggestions and ideas on how we improve these things, I'm all ears. Again, it is the responsibility and the jurisdiction of the municipalities. However, we're going to work together, and specifically with this study in February, I think that creates a lot of dialogue for us to move forward, and again, where we can help, we certainly will. Thank you.
The honourable member for Queens Shelburne on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, crosswalk safety isn't a new issue, but I think the Minister of Transportation would agree that there are always opportunities to find new and better ways of doing things. My final question to the Minister is that what new initiatives is government examining to ensure crosswalk safety is at the top of the minds of all Nova Scotians?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Basically, how this works is the Transportation Association of Canada creates a set of standards, and that's sort of abided by for all provinces and all municipal units. So we take those recommendations. The idea is to standardize them. So whether you're in Nova Scotia, you're in BC, you're in all points in between, there's a standardized set of rules, signage, those types of things. So, you know, that's the information that we have. Obviously, as a provincial government, we set those regulations and those laws, and it's up to the municipalities to make adjustments on how they meet those requirements, and all our municipal units in this province have done a very good job to meet those requirements. So again, to the member's point, those stakeholders who have a role in this serious issue for Nova Scotians and have points and perspectives that they want to share, we're listening. We want to make sure we do the best things for pedestrians. And again, I do want to remind all Nova Scotians that this is a shared responsibility. We have to be very careful on the streets. Just because you have the right of way, don't assume that you know, you're safe to proceed. Make sure you're looking and you're aware of both sides of the road for traffic. The biggest amount of collisions and problems that we have are with sidewalks that are at intersections of lights. So just when you get that beeping hand, doesn't mean you can bolt across. That's been the highest number statistically for incidents in this province. So they're the type of things that we want to share. Sharing information is important, and I think that in February, some of that report will suggest that we do more advertising and more marketing on the importance of road safety, and if that's the recommendation from municipal units, we'll do just that. Thank you.
The honourable member for Clare Digby.
Mr. Speaker, first I'd like to thank you very much for the privilege, and the House thank them for the privilege of being able to stand here and ask questions on behalf of the citizens of Clare Digby. Mr. Speaker, this question is for the Minister of Health. La Villa-Kedia nursing home has been slated for replacement for some time now, and the citizens of the community of Meteghan have watched as two nursing homes adjoining them in Digby and Yarmouth have been replaced. During my campaign, Mr. Speaker, La Villa-Kedia was the #1 question on the minds of the people of Clare for replacement. Mr. Speaker, can the Minister provide the House with a project update on La Villa-Kedia nursing home? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. This announcement, I believe, was first made under the Rodney MacDonald government. It's gone through now over 4 years under the NDP government. It is identified in the top 15 replacement bed facilities that we need to be working on, and I want to let the member know that it will be in the first group of replacement facilities that will be initiated by this government.
The honourable member for Kings North.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Agriculture. Mr. Speaker, late last week the Minister of Agriculture announced an aid package for strawberry growers in the amount of $2.3 million. The amount provided by the government is about half of what the industry requested. Mr. Speaker, it is important to the province's strawberry industry that all strawberry growers eradicate the virus that damaged last year's crop. If the aid package provided by the government is insufficient to do the job, will the minister provide more funding to make sure the Nova Scotia strawberry crop is healthy and sustainable in the coming years?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you very much for my honourable colleague's question. It's a very important question to the agricultural industry in the province, and we are presently under negotiations, having meetings with the Federation of Agriculture, and the farmers are involved to see if indeed the funding is suitable for the situation that we've encountered.
The honourable member for Kings North on his first supplementary.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, large Nova Scotia strawberry growers have not seen any details about who will qualify and when the aid will be provided by the government. Farmers are planning now for next year's crop. When will the minister provide strawberry growers with details about the aid package and timelines when the aid will be delivered?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
I'd like to thank the honourable member again for the question. Actually, I met with the strawberry producers on Sunday. The application forms will be soon in their hands. They had an opportunity to review the information of how they would apply and have some input into that application process. And we made some changes that would suit their situation better, and that will be in their hands very shortly.
The honourable member for Kings North on his final supplementary.
I thank the Mr. Speaker. I thank the minister for the answer. Mr. Speaker, if the government aid package is insufficient, the temptation will be there for some struggling farmers to do nothing and hope for the best crop possible next year. That will put nearby strawberry farms in jeopardy since the destructive viruses will continue to spread. What is the Department of Agriculture doing, Mr. Speaker, to ensure the viruses that cause the farmers to plough under millions of dollars worth of crop doesn't return next year?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
That's a very important question, and it's one that has been posed by the industry itself. Unfortunately, under the present laws and the regulations we have, I do not have the ability to order those fields plowed under. There is some other processes we're looking at to see if we can make that happen, and hopefully it will happen. As the member is probably well aware, if they leave the strawberry plants in the field, the yield will be so low on it that it doesn't make any difference anyway whether they keep them or not, but they should be plowed under, and we're going to endeavor to do everything we can to make sure those are plowed under.
The honourable member for Chester St. Margaret's.
My question is to the Minister of Seniors. The Liberals have promised a 1% cut to almost every single government department, including the Department of Seniors. This is a small department that financially supports extremely important programs for our seniors population. $1 cut will negatively affect our Nova Scotia seniors in that department. Any cuts will. So my question to the Minister, why is the Minister cutting funding to the Department of Seniors why is the Minister cutting funding to the Department of Seniors when seniors need our support the most?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness and Seniors.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for a very, very important question. I can see already, since arriving at the Department of Health and Wellness and Seniors, that the demand grows daily, whether it's nursing home facilities, whether it's programs that have them active in the community. These are all very, very important areas. At the present time, we're actually reviewing having the Department of Seniors become within the jurisdiction of the Department of Health and Wellness.
The honourable member for Chester St. Margaret's on her first supplementary.
Thank you very much for that answer. But when I went door to door, I know many seniors were very confused about what programs were available. And they were pleased to learn that the new Seniors Navigators program could connect people who have information about where to turn. The new Seniors Navigator program was scheduled to begin in 2014. Will the minister commit to implementing the Seniors Navigator program?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness and Seniors.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and again, a very, very important part of the program delivery from the Department of Seniors, and it is one that I know in the community that I represent is very important to a significant number I live in a part of Nova Scotia where already there are 5 communities that have 25% of their population that are over 65. This is an important program. It will remain in place.
The honourable member for Chester St. Margaret's on her final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Knowing that the budget year ends in April, when will this consultation process begin?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness and Seniors.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I know that we will be dealing with the Seniors Secretariat, the Department of Seniors, and I know when I do the provincial tour around the restructuring of the DHAs, it'll be broad enough that many questions regarding healthcare delivery and in particular what we will be doing for seniors in the coming decades will be very much top of mind. And so early in the new year, that will be part of the process in the DHA tour.
The Honourable Member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Environment. Mr. Speaker, last week, the Minister of Natural Resources told this House that he has, quote, never been a proponent of reducing protected land targets. I will table that, Mr. Speaker. My question for the Minister of the Environment is, has his colleague, the Minister of Natural Resources, written any correspondence to the Department of the Environment within the last 12 months calling for a moratorium on protected lands?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since the question posed actually details correspondence for my colleague, Minister of Natural Resources, I'd like to defer to him since he would be the source of the correspondence in question.
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the member's point, I sent a letter on behalf of constituents that felt they were ignored during the NDP consultation process regarding protected lands. They had very specific concerns about accessing their camps and recreational grounds that they have used for generations, Mr. Speaker. I brought those concerns to the floor of this legislature as any MLA would who is representing their people. I'm proud of that. I will continue to do that on behalf of my members in my riding. And again, for the clarification of the House, Mr. Speaker, all parties unanimously voted in favor of that 13% target. This government remains committed to it.
The Honourable Member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River on her first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I've read about the meeting that was held, and in fact, I believe a lot of the residents were given misinformation, which was corrected by one of the members of the department at the time. The Protected Areas and Parks Plan, which the province released in August of 2013, was the result of 2,000 written submissions and input from more than 1,300 people at 17 public open house sessions held across this province. But in spite of this, earlier this week, the Minister of Natural Resources said that his government will make sure the views of those asking for a moratorium on protected land will be considered moving forward. And I will table that, Mr. Speaker. So in April of 2011, the Sou'wester reported that the goal of the petition, Mr. Churchill, that the goal of the petition that the members signed was a complete moratorium on protected land identified in 40 different areas in Digby, Shelburne, and Yarmouth County. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, my question for the Minister of the Environment, can he please confirm whether these protected lands identified in the final Parks and Protected Areas Plan in August of 2013 are now actually being reconsidered by his department as stated by the Minister of Natural Resources?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
No, Environment. Sorry.
The The Honourable.
She's asking a question about that.
Okay. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to clarify for the House, this government is going to ensure that all voices are included in any decision that we make when it comes to our protected lands. Because, Mr. Speaker, and especially, Mr. Speaker, the voices of those who live next to those protected lands and who have used them forever. This is a question around access to camps and recreational use. Our government remains committed to ensuring that Nova Scotians have access to our lands. And I guess I'm happy this question came up in the House because it identifies a clear difference between how the NDP approached this issue and how this government approaches this issue. The NDP sees Crown land as being the property of the government. Us, Mr. Speaker, we see our Crown land as being the property of the people of this province.
The Honourable Member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River on her final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for his answer, although I did not ask him that question. It was for the Minister of the Environment. However, Mr. Speaker, I do want to say that when we first became government as the NDP in this province, the people of Nova Scotia only owned 2% of their own land, and we brought that up to 13%, and I'm extremely proud of that, Mr. Speaker. In fact, Mr. Speaker, our NDP government was lauded for our protected lands and conservation movements. We went from being last in this province to second in that area. And so my question, my third and final question, is for the Minister of the Environment. Can the Minister of Environment, if he's listening, could the Minister of Environment...
Order, please. Would the Honourable Member please retract that previous comment? The Honourable Member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Well, he wasn't listening, but I will retract that comment.
Would the Honourable Member please proceed with her question?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our NDP government was lauded by conservation groups across Canada for adding 14 new provincial parks to the final parks and recreation areas, which means that Nova Scotians have gone from owning only 2% of the province to 13%. My question for the Minister of Environment, can he please confirm unequivocally that at least 13% of our province's land will be protected for future generations of Nova Scotia by the year 2015, as committed by our previous NDP government?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for her question. Finally, a question that is actually directed to my attention. Before answering the specific question, I'd like to make a couple of clarifications. First and foremost, the 12 and 13% that have been referred does not refer to land that specifically owned or any change in the ownership specifically to the province of Nova Scotia. What that percentages refer to in the Parks and Protected Lands is lands that is protected by the province of Nova Scotia. It does not refer specifically to lands owned by the province of Nova Scotia. So let's make that clear. I would also like to clarify, as the Minister of Natural Resources stated earlier, the final point that was made in the preamble to the question is the fact that the decision to pursue an initiative to protect increased lands in the province of Nova Scotia was not just an initiative of the former government, but it was a decision that was unanimously passed by the House of all parties in the province of Nova Scotia. So let's get that clarified as well. And finally, Mr. Speaker, I would like to answer the actual question that the member opposite raised. And in fact, yes, this government the Department of Environment, Natural Resources, and all members of this government, and I believe this House, still stand by the decision that was previously made unanimously, which is to continue to pursue the parks and protected lands and pursue the initiatives to continue to protect the lands that have been identified. Currently, we're at about 9.5% that have actually been protected. There have been initiatives in place over the last year or so that has increased that amount of land identified. We're in the process and continuing the process to make the necessary adjustments in the designations of those lands, and that is moving forward, and we are moving forward on that initiative, and it will be taking place. Any suggestions that the government is not committed to it is off grounds. Thank you.
Honourable member for Sydney River, Myra Lewisburg.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal. He looked lonely over there. Mr. Speaker, during the last provincial election and shortly thereafter, the Premier of the province made a commitment to the people of Manitou that he would indeed have the MV Minor removed from the shores of the Scattery. As the member knows, and he was very active on the file as a member of the opposition, that has been an issue in that community for some time. The Premier also made it aware that the Minister for TIR would be the department responsible for this file. I would just like to know if the Minister could share with us what he has done towards keeping the commitment of the Premier for the removal of the MV Minor from the shores of Scattery.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I truly do thank the member for that question. It's an important one for us on the island and, of course, for all Nova Scotians. What we found, and I know that the member was very active as well on that file, we traveled to Ottawa in November of 2011 with the former Premier to discuss the MV Minor. At that point, it was wrapped up in whose responsibility it was, and really for 2 years it didn't move from that point. We made the commitment during the campaign as part of our platform. We will definitely fulfill that commitment without question. What I want to tell the member is, and he's right about it came under TIR, we had no idea what the range of costs were for removing the MV Minor. So what we did right off the bat was crafted up a new RFP, which will be released early in the new year, in early 2014. We'll get that tender out to the competitive sector for that type of removal. We'll get the process rolling. Then we turn to our friends to Ottawa to talk about, number one, how we possibly cost share on that endeavour, and number two, how we change the shipping laws so that this never happens again. Nova Scotians can't be on the hook for these bills, Mr. Speaker. So it is moving along, and we certainly will. I can assure the member we will honour our commitment. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Sydney River, Myra Lewisburg, on his first supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Minister for that answer, and I know that he is committed to this file. However, it has dragged on for over 2 years, and even though the former NDP Premier made a similar commitment to remove the MV Minor, it's still there, and this government now has to deal with it. As a matter of fact, in the Chronicle Herald on October the 7th, 2011, the Premier of the day, he said, "It is necessary for us to see this matter is dealt with in as quick a fashion as possible," and I'll table that, Mr. Speaker. And if 2 years is quick, then we do understand why he's where he's at today. Mr. Speaker, will the minister commit that this cleanup will take place regardless if there's federal involvement in the cleanup or not?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I do thank the member for that question as well. Basically, the reason why this is moving at the pace it is basically because of the weather, as no one can attest to more than the member opposite. The Scattery and the area around there in the Atlantic are very tough waters. This is a massive vessel that's been sort of shifting around, as it has been 2 years, which is far too long. So where we're at is basically we're on a timeline that has a lot to do with A, the weather, and B, the fact that we still are unsure present day of the condition of the vessel, how we remove it, what are the options. We hear stories of asbestos. PFOS and other contaminants that are out there. We got to handle this properly and do it right. That's the key, and that's the importance of this RFP, Mr. Speaker. We get the tender out in the new year, then we start looking at it. You know, knock on wood, but I can't imagine that we wouldn't get at this right away. My goal and our goal as a government is to make sure the MV minor is gone before the 2014 fishing season around the coast of the Scattery. Thank you.
The honourable member for Sydney River, Myra Lewisburg, on his final supplementary.
Well, thank you again, Mr. Speaker, for that. And again, I want to thank the Minister for that response, because it is important that this cleanup does not take place during the actual lobster season, because it would disturb the lobster season. So I'm pleased to hear that the Minister is aware of that. And of course, I know from meetings that we've both attended that he's listened quite intently to the people of Manadoo and surrounding area. My final question to the Minister would be this: will the Minister commit to meeting with the community and outlining the details of the plans once that plan has been put in place, so that they have an idea of what's going to take place in their community before the work actually starts?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And that is one of the elements in the equation. It is the upcoming fishing season. So I think that, you know, if this timeline sort of shifts into that season, I mean, we're not that far from May. So if that was the case, we could maybe delay it until after that point. I don't want to speculate on those things. Again, our priority and our focus right now is getting that gone well before that time. Once the weather breaks and we can get out there and get at it and start removing the minor, then that's what we'll do. Mr. Speaker, the community group that's out there, there's a lot of committed people. They're outside of the political realm. They don't care about what party it is and what the politics are. They want this boat gone. That's why it's a commitment for us. We will consult the entire way with the Manadoo Association, who have been leaders on this endeavour, and I'd be happy to meet with the group anytime, either before Christmas or in the new year, to tell them what I know. I'd prefer to do it after the RFP is released, so we know exactly what the details for the cleanup are, but I'll meet with them at any time. Thank you.
The honourable member for Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Justice. We all know that when children go through trauma, their lives can be affected for a very long time. The Premier joined the PC caucus some time ago, calling for an inquiry into the alleged historical abuse at the Nova Scotia Home for Coloured Children. The Premier said he hoped that the terms of reference for an inquiry would be set by the end of the year. My question is, does the government intend to set the terms of reference for this inquiry by the end of the year?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you very much to the member opposite. Indeed, this is a very important question. And it's a question that's very important to all the residents of Nova Scotia. Specifically, the residents in questions have gone through so much, and they do want to move on. And as everyone knows, that the court process is still has not proceeded. Yes, we are working on the terms of reference now, and we do plan to begin the inquiry as soon as we are able to do that, and the idea is to have it done this spring. Thank you.
The honourable member for Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley, on his first supplementary.
And I do, Mr. Speaker, I do appreciate that answer. And it was the indication and is that the inquiry is to happen through the spring. The Premier pointed out at one time that there are people who want to take part in this inquiry that live away. These men and women need to know what the time frame would be so that they can adequately prepare to come back for that inquiry or make their voice be heard. So I guess the question is, when will a date be set for that inquiry?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As I said, this issue is an important issue, and it's one important for all of us here in this province. We are working on the terms of reference. Officials in my department are meeting with the lawyer for the the residents, and we are in the process of having those terms established. Thank you.
The honourable member for Colchester Musquodoboit Valley on his final supplementary.
Well, I really don't have a supplementary question now. Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased that the inquiry will take place, and we will be awaiting future information. Thank you.
The honourable member for Queens Shelburne.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Natural Resources. Mr. Speaker, last week, when the Minister was asked a direct question about how he was going to meet the fibre supply needs for those who work our forests, he gave an answer that was non-committal at best. My question for the Minister, in the same vein as last week, how, Mr. Speaker, does he plan to balance the need for fibre to feed our economy with an adequate fibre supply while maintaining the province's protected targets?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the question. Our department's working diligently to have a management plan ready for the new year regarding the western lands, and our plan is to have allotments allocated early in the new year at that time, Mr. Speaker. But it's curious that this minister is asking that question, because previously, as the Minister of Environment, he was the lead on protecting land. Of course, one of the fibre challenges that we have in the province of Nova Scotia, the Crown only owns about 30% of the land in this province, and upwards of 30% of that land is now protected. So I'd ask the member opposite, what is his preference, that we unprotect land to open up the fibre supply?
The honourable member for Queens Shelburne on his first supplementary.
Just a point, Mr. Speaker, I'm the one that asked the questions. He's the one that should answer. Mr. Speaker, the member from Yarmouth isn't the only Liberal who opposes land conservation efforts. On April the 11th, the Liberal member from Guysborough Eastern Shore Tracadie called the 13% land protection target a complete farce when it went to say, and I quote, "Whoever the heck the Crown is, I don't know if that's the Queen. I guess it helps the province or holds the provinces in trust for the Crown," end quote. And I'll table that, Mr. Speaker. My second question to the Minister is, when he has a member of his own caucus who is obviously opposed to finding a balance between protection and supply, what is his strategy for dealing with his colleagues who don't think conserving our forests should be a priority?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I view any dialogue in this legislature as just that, a dialogue between two parties, Mr. Speaker. Regarding the protected lands question, of course there was some disagreement in the public. I know that the goal of this legislature was to accommodate in a balanced way all interests when it comes to those lands. I believe that the government has done its best to do that. We settled on a 13% target. That is a target that this government remains committed to unequivocally. And if there's any debate about this issue, we can talk about it further.
The honourable member for Queens Shelburne on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, just last week the Ecology Action Centre praised our conservation efforts as a monumental achievement for natural conservation, and I'll table that. Mr. Speaker, my final question for the Minister. Can Nova Scotians expect any changes to the current Parks and Protected Area Plan?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
You know, Mr. Speaker, this is very interesting. I just had a meeting with a member the other day who brought forward concerns from his members about access to protected lands and use of ATV vehicles. So I'd like the member to make it clear, do you want access to those lands or not?
The Honourable Member for Northside Westmount.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, if we want to ensure more seniors are able to stay in their homes, then the government needs to make that possible for struggling seniors. A constituent of mine, Ada Green, receives home care twice a day, and her husband Cecil struggles to keep the maintenance of their home on a fixed income. He cannot afford to pay to have his driveway shoveled,
But if it's not cleared, home care will not come to provide the services his wife needs. So my question to the Minister is, does the Minister agree that this defeats the purpose of allowing the family to stay in their own homes?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness and Seniors.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for the question. And I know it is through individual issues and concerns that we're able to give more support to the home care program. This year, the budget had a significant increase in home care, and it obviously is not expanded to look after those kinds of needs at the moment, but I will certainly take the member's letter and concern of his constituent under my concern.
The Honourable Member for Northside Westmount on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, our seniors have worked hard and contributed all their lives. They deserve better than this. Mr. Green struggles to keep his family's head above water. Once a month, he's forced to visit the local food bank to ensure there is food on the table for him and his wife. The reality is this is not a situation unique to my constituency. Seniors all over the province are struggling. Many who wish to remain in their homes find it unaffordable and the system is unresponsive. So my question to the Minister is, what choice is the Minister giving the seniors? Does he really expect to keep seniors in their homes when they are already struggling to afford it?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness and Seniors.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it is an important question because we do have to keep more seniors in their homes, and it is an expanded program that looks after, in fact, what may seem to us as small needs, in fact, are very significant and large needs when it comes to getting into wood, cutting a lawn, and as the member opposite has brought up today, shoveling the snow to allow the caregivers to get to the house of a senior. So it's one that I will take very seriously. We're at the moment we're reviewing the continuing care program and all that entails, and it does have a major emphasis and component around keeping seniors in the home.
The Honourable Member for Northside Westmount on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. But as we wait for a review of the continuing care strategy, more families will be faced with impossible challenges. As winter approaches, more families like the Greens will struggle to clear their driveways so their loved ones can receive the proper home care. So my question to the Minister, is there anything that we can do now to protect those families before the winter season pushes them into further hardship?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness and Seniors.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And sometimes I know in my riding, I've been able to partner with a service club that had a list of individuals who were prepared to help seniors. I know we want to expand the program. At the present time, we're living with a budget that's already in place, and one that is very difficult to make adaptations to at this point in the year. But I will certainly take this case and what it means on the larger picture of providing a full array of services to help seniors stay in their home.
The Honourable Member for Inverness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Energy. Nova Scotia Power has started a request for proposals to replace approximately 250 employees. This includes thermal plant maintenance for power plants like Point Tupper and line work along the South Shore and in the Valley. They plan to have discussions with companies who would do this work in the first quarter of 2014. My question, does the Minister agree with Nova Scotia Power that skilled labour can be found at a lower price to replace these workers?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the question from the member. I've already spoken with the IBEW and Nova Scotia Power about this issue. quite frankly, I will not accept anything that reduces the service for Nova Scotians or the reliability for Nova Scotians in power generation, distribution, or safety in this province. I've made that absolutely clear to Nova Scotia Power. I will not let that happen, and I have had ongoing discussions. In fact, either myself or the Deputy Minister of my department has had pretty well weekly discussions with the IBEW on this matter, and we're keeping in constant communication.
The honourable member for Inverness on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, on the Big Harbour Island Road along the shores of the Bredor Lakes, residents went without power for 67 hours last week. That was from Tuesday night at about 10:30 until Friday at a little bit after 5 o'clock. Now, Mr. Speaker, this is a line service that could benefit from a more responsive outlay of resources by the company. But it is a service delivered by Nova Scotians who live in our communities. These are people who have made a commitment to living here and raising families and presumably have their neighbours' best interests at heart. What specific assurances can the Minister provide for people on the Big Harbour Island Road that they will receive better service if future line workers are brought in from out of province to respond to power outages?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a little bit of a strange question because there are no specific assurances that I would provide because I just finished telling the member that I will not stand for anything which reduces the service to Nova Scotians, and moreover, I'm not convinced and I'm not sure how Nova Scotia Power feels that they would deliver many of those services without actually having people living here. It's pretty hard to operate a plant if the people who are operating the plant don't live here, for example. So, Mr. Speaker, I made that clear in the first answer, and I think his question is probably better addressed in that case to the people who are putting out the RFP, because I've already told this member that I won't stand for anything that reduces the reliability of the service to Nova Scotians.
The honourable member for Inverness on his final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, word on the street is that a BC company called Ballard Power is interested in picking up this contract. Now, Nova Scotia's Power's actions may be a retaliation to the government's commitment to charge the efficiency tax to Nova Scotia Power. If labour costs form a smaller percentage of overall power rate costs, and these changes will not lead to lower power bills, what is the government doing to address this matter for those workers who are living with uncertainty as we head into the Christmas season?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I already told the member, and maybe he wrote his supplementaries before he actually listened to the answers, but the reality is that we've been having weekly discussions with the union about this, and they've indicated they're actually very happy with the discussions they've been having with me and my department. Mr. Speaker, moreover, the fact that this member thinks that it's a retaliatory thing against this government's decision to remove a tax that this party decides to defend on Nova Scotians is a bit funny, since it shows how little they are paying attention to the actions of Nova Scotia Power, because this work actually began and the layoffs at Nova Scotia Power actually began about 9 months before we were even in power, and the RFPs were in and the knowledge of the RFP.
Order, please. The Honourable Minister of Energy has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And moreover, the RFPs were prepared before the election even began.
Just a housekeeping note, we will go to 1141. The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Health and Wellness this afternoon. According to the province's emergency care advisor, Dr. John Ross, collaborative emergency centres, or CECs, are community-based and locally managed solutions to the basic health care needs of Nova Scotians, while maintaining ready access to 24-hour emergency care. Ross acknowledges the innovative core team of paramedics, nurses, and physicians, with the support from many others, make best use of the available resources in communities across Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. So my question for the Minister of Health is, will he commit today to continuing this innovative model of care here in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the former Health Minister for the question. CECs are proving to be valuable primary care extensions in our community. There are very few that are providing urgent or emergency care. They are an important part of supplementing communities, especially that have shortages of physicians or nurse practitioners. And our commitment, while a review will be going on, our commitment is to continue to support CECs.
The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think for us in our party and on this side, and I think Nova Scotians are cautious when they hear a review. We've heard many from the current government within healthcare, education, that reviews will take place. And really, reviews, Mr. Speaker, means a delay. And that's why I find it extremely important that the Minister of Health recognizes the contributions of the change of model of care with collaborative emergency centres. We have communities like Parsboro, Spring Hill, Tatamagouche, Pugwash, Annapolis Royal, who currently now have available to their residents same-day or next-day appointments, which is extremely important, Mr. Speaker. So I hope that the 7 more communities that were recently announced that they would receive a CEC would not be caught up in what a review is from the current government, Mr. Speaker, and I hope the Minister will commit to that today.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness and Seniors.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The CECs are proven to be valuable extensions of primary health care. Each community has unique requests. We are looking at those requests, and I think there will be some news in the not-too-distant future about CECs and communities that desire to have this particular model and extension of primary care.
The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister opposite. I'm glad to hear him using the term valuable, and that CECs are valuable to Nova Scotians, because I would agree with that, Mr. Speaker, and I will support the Minister and this government as long as they continue to recognize the value in ensuring that Nova Scotians have access to the care they need, especially in CECs. We know over the past number of years, the current Premier criticized collaborative emergency centres, Mr. Speaker. So I'm glad to see that the Minister of Health maybe doesn't hold that opinion of collaborative emergency centres, and I look forward.
Order, please. Time allotted for oral questions to ministers has expired. I recognize the Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I stated yesterday, that the New Democratic Party will not be calling business today because of a very, very important meeting that you're holding in the Red Chamber beginning at 2, Mr. Speaker. So it would be our position, Mr. Speaker, that we'll turn it over now to the Government House Leader to announce time and business for tomorrow.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and again extend my thanks to the House Leader for the NDP for the cooperation that was shown for the hours today. For tomorrow's business, the House will meet from noon till 10 p.m. During that time, government business